Please, code is being verified. Your passcode has been accepted. Please enter your personal identification number, followed by the pound sign. At the
43rd
call in the conference. To mute or unmute your line during the call, please press *6 at any time.
Adding one other thing here to the mix. We're trying to get a little bit more discussion going, and part of that is in response to your suggestions to us. And, these are decisions that faculty make on a day-to-day basis, how to balance out the discussion from the content that we want to give. So we're on the side of trying to do more time for questions and answers and discussion. And we're going to use responses to a couple of the case studies in the chat text. And I think you all see where the chat text is. And we're going to have you send it to all participants. So I think we can go ahead and get started. I'm dispensing with some warm-up stuff so that we can get quickly to give Cindy her opportunity to share her wonderful wisdom with you. And I'm going to put her and her bio up here. And as I introduce her, Nick Farrell, can you pass the call to Cindy so she can manipulate the slides? So welcome, Cindy. We're glad to have you with us. And Dr. Clark is a professor of nursing at Boise State. She teaches in the baccalaureate program. As you can see, all the initials after her name. She's a fellow in Academy of Nursing Education, so congratulations for that. A national expert on civility in nursing education, and she has a website. I will compliment her on her professional generosity. She has shared all kinds of information with you, and there's the web link again. She has shared a lot of background information. One thing that I direct your attention to, and Cindy's work is now moving into nursing service, and she has given some background slides of why this is really important, that it's just not a nursing education that civility is an issue. And actually, when you go to the discussion forum, you'll see one of the scholars has already posted a story here, and it comes from a nursing service setting. So we know that this is a universal issue that we're wanting to learn how to identify and to work with. So I'm going to, I think Cindy probably could go on all day about how wonderful you are, but let's just move right to the session, and I'll stop and you take over.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me today. This has been such a fun experience for me. This is my first webinar, by the way, so I hope everyone bears with me as I become a novice, hopefully as we go through. We're going to go straight to the objectives. I had an opportunity to review them in the handouts that I sent. I just want to briefly remind you that we'll talk some about the state of the science. We'll talk about how to recognize incivility stressors contribute, and how both students and faculty engage in a dance of incivility. And then most important, some of the ready-to-use strategies we can use to foster civility. And so Dr. Billings and I thought it might be fun to jump right in, get our feet wet immediately, thinking about some of this content. So if you look at the case of Abby, she's a second-year nursing student. She's in a theory class. She's doing pretty well with meeting her course objectives, but she's fairly impertinent, somewhat rude, late, disruptive. And you notice she's checking her Facebook during class. So what do you do about that? So you see items there. If you can, I think Nicholas is going to help us do the polling on this.
Actually,
go ahead and make your selection.
Cindy, Nick, because he's not the presenter, can't do the poll. So perhaps we can just have, why doesn't everybody just of choose the one that they want to. Nick, if we can.
I was going to suggest perhaps a show of hands. If you
okay.
take a moment and say, how many think that question A is the right response, and we can do a quick hand up and down.
Yeah. So we'll do it like that, and Cindy, help you look and see if we can kind of get a sense of how many chose A, B, C, or D, and then we'll kind of go from there. So everybody knows how to raise your hand. That little icon there on the left, below the list of names. So I'm looking to see how many of you would like to select A as the action to take. Okay. We have 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So yes, and then put your hands down, and now let's ask about B. And I'll cut those up. So we'll get it to see if you want to do select B. Going, gone. Okay. How about C? Immediately talk to Abby about her behavior and kind of see if you can nip it in the bud there. Okay. Anybody want to raise your that one? Going. Okay. And then that leaves the D. So how many people are going to raise your hand for that? Okay, it looks like we have at least 10 people that have raised their hand, maybe even more. I'm just kind of looking at the numbers. So we have some that would like to do A and some that would like to do D. We didn't get any takers for B or C. So back to you, Cindy.
Yeah, nice job. I'd like to just comment on a couple of things. I can totally get why some of you selected A. And that was, for a while, one of the strategies we thought was quite effective. Yet, in later, thoughts on this and thinking more about it, that might be a way that actually could further provoke the student. And that's because some students, if we enter their space, and we don't always know what that perceived space is because it's individual, could in fact some action. I'd like to comment only on C to the extent that it is the not correct answer. But one of the things we'll be talking about this morning is how important it is to address the behavior. And you'll hear me say, perhaps if not later, certainly now, that to remain silent is to condone. So at some point there does need to be some, conversation with Abby. And then many of you picked the last one, which is clearly the best response of these four. And as we go through today's information, you'll discover how being very proactive and preventive by establishing classroom norms is really our best strategy. Okay, ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So we're going to click through some of these slides fairly quickly, but I want to make a comment about the state of science to the extent that when you read about incivility in higher education, there's a fair and a robust body of work. When you look at it in terms of the nursing science and what we know in nursing education, this is very new territory. The first empirical paper was only written 9 years ago in 2001 by Drs. Lashley and Damon Ennis. And since then, they've not authored much, but they really opened the door for this study. And it was relatively silent for years until a couple other scholars came along, and we've really drilled down into what this is. So I just wanted to mention we're talking about less than a decade of science. On the first slide, I only mentioned that is an outgrowth of a concept analysis, which I know as scholars, many of you may already be involved with. And so Civility really is, it requires certain things, and that's presence and engagement. And then conversely, when we think about incivility, that is a disregard or an insolence for us. And I want to note there Emery and Holmes coming from higher education, where they underline stress, and because we'll be talking about stress later on. So then, okay, if that's incivility, what is academic incivility? And that is also a definition crafted by Feldman. Basically, any behavior that disrupts the academic environment. So it's a pretty open definition. And he and others really didn't define, well, what do we mean by the academic environment? So in 2006, I made an attempt to define that, because in nursing education, we are wherever nursing takes place, whether it's clinical, classroom, live, virtual, or wherever that may be, patients' homes, in public health settings, and so forth. And those behaviors can range from mild to extreme. And then we really didn't have a working definition of incivility in nursing education, so this is my attempt, and published this in 2009, where we're beginning to look at the psychological and physiological distress. This is very important because I've listened literally to hundreds, if not 1,000 or more stories over the years on students and faculty and nurses in practice talking about their uncivil encounters. And many of them, if you didn't ask them, not know that the encounter they're describing happened ago or 20 years ago, because some of them are still quite traumatized by the event. And of course, we want to be sure to address this before it goes into further escalation. Students and faculty incivility are defined for you, but I want to draw your attention to the other definition of the dance of incivility, where we're really talking about an interactive process. So that these kinds of events don't happen in isolation, they happen in relationship. And if you're interested in reading more on the dance of incivility, it's referenced in the 2008 issue of Advances in Nursing Science. So I think it's always interesting to say, what doesn't incivility mean? And of course, we as academicians and those of us in the academy know that it is really our job to create an environment where we can have intense debates, where we can challenge ideas, opinions, and so forth. And we want to be able to do that in a safe way. And so while we want to invoke questions and so forth, we must create a culture of civility where the kinds of activities can flourish. So I'm beginning to challenge really my own work on this continuum of incivility, still calling it a continuum of incivility, but wondering, where is it that along this continuum of behaviors, from least to most disruptive to actually violent and homicidal kinds of behaviors, where does bullying begin and abuse begin and violence begin? So I think that there's some work to be done as we consider this continuum. And if we were to plot certain behaviors on a continuum, this is my attempt to show you a little bit about. Diane, I'm going to ask you here, can you guys see my pointer when I?
No.
Okay. Okay. So so you'll see that, you know, disruptive kinds of irritating behaviors, all up to cheating, which we'll talk about a little bit later because it's becoming more prevalent, all the way up to and including racial and ethnic bullying, threats of physical harm, violence, and homicide. And so this is just a slide to suggest that if we don't address it, then things can escalate into violence. So let's pause and kind of consider for a bit the case of Adam. And in this regard, we would like the master's students to take the first shot at responding to the case of Adam. And you can see here that Adam is kind of growing in terms of his escalation. You know, he's disruptive, he's text messaging in class, he's distractive, sometimes he makes suggestive remarks. Now he's been accused of sending sexually suggestive emails. His behavior is escalating, he's angry, And now a group of students have come to you and ask you to make some sort of intervention. So what do you do?
And I wanted to add, Dr. Clark, that everyone will go to the chat menu, which is below the participants menu on the right-hand side, and just send your message to all participants.
Okay, and there's some background noise, so if it's somebody that needs to do *6 to mute, please be sure that that's on. Right now we're looking for some comments from people who are going to type in with the text box, and then if we have discuss it, of course, and then if anybody would like to raise your hand with additional comments or questions. But right now, probably you are looking for that text box. It's way down at the bottom of your right-hand screen, and send it to participants and type in some ideas of what to do here. You're the faculty that is receiving this information. What are you going to do?
Just want the students to send.
All participants, if it doesn't allow you to send to all participants, then send to all panelists. And we'll verbally relay some of those messages.
Okay.
Okay. And I think that was Dr. Joel. The reason here, while you guys are thinking of some answers, is just trying to make the group participation just a little bit smaller. And then, if we don't get some ideas here, then we'll open it up for others and try to get a little discussion going. But in the meantime, here I think, Nick, that's what did it. We needed to have some kind of can everybody see? Rusty is posted, and Aaron and Andrew.
Excuse me, Diane. I'm sorry, I unmuted. I cannot type in the chat box. Can you give some directions, please?
Okay.
Do you see the blue bar that says chat?
Yes.
Now, if you click on that arrow to the left, it should bring you a chat box down. Do you see that?
I do that. It opens up the names larger. I see the chat box. It's about a 3x3 square. I tried to click in it. I type.
You might make sure that the box above that is selected to host presenter list. You send to.
At the bottom it says all panelists.
Okay, so you want to take off of all panelists and send it to host presenter list. Select that. If you hit the drop box, do you see that?
Yes.
So if it should let you now, after you put in host presenter and panelists, are you able to write in the box now?
No.
This is Lucille. Same with me.
Okay. And right now we're really wanting the scholars, the master's students here, and we have quite a few. And Rusty's asking, saying she can only see her post, and I believe that's true. So what we'll do here when we get a few more. Cindy, can you see these?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'll start responding to those.
Okay, why don't we just go ahead and do that, and then we'll own it for
people can continue to type in.
Yeah. Okay, so
Shall I proceed?
Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
I just it looks like several of the schools have suggested that there be a meeting with Adam, and that's right. Most of them have also suggested that it be private. I would like to make a suggestion here, though, that you notice that there are the continuum we just glanced at, that you see the more irritating behaviors, and this is an escalation. It's like anything else, and we as nurses, I think, are quite good at this. The problem is that we don't have experience doing classroom management in the same way we do doing nursing. For instance, if we see a small lesion on a patient or someone we know, we're going to address it immediately. In fact, we're probably going to try to prevent it from happening in the first place with sunscreen or whatever. The same is true when we're talking about classroom management. Whatever we can do to preempt and prevent or to make the earliest intervention is absolutely critical. And so, yes, you are correct when you suggest we ought to have a meeting with him, but some other things prior to that could also be useful. And talk about some of those when we get to the strategies, or I can review those now. What would you like me to do, Diane?
Well, I see that several other additional comments here that you might want to just kind of read. And I will say to everybody, you apparently not able to see everybody's postings. Well, try to give some other ideas. But Cindy's sizing, and then while Cindy responds to a couple of these questions, let's have 2 or 3 urgent questions or comments that people would like to make at this point in time. We'll open it up to everybody, the faculty and to the doctoral students.
If you have a question, please put your hand down.
So we'll take, while we're waiting to see if anybody has questions, I don't know if you can see, Andrew has made several helpful suggestions here. Can you see those? Okay, do you want...
I really like... yes, the respondents who talk about rules of the classrooms or norms, they're absolutely right. So if those can be established the very first day, and we'll talk about how you do that when we get to the so what now what section of today's webinar, that is very helpful because it can prevent further escalation if you can refer to those norms and revise them as necessary throughout the course of the semester.
Okay, great. And I see that we have 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to go to a scholar first. We have Rashida, and then I also see that Dr. Joel has a comment to make. And
no, Dr. Joel does not. Dr. Joel's all met with the...
Okay, well, let's call on Rashida. And Rashida, you need to unmute your line. I think it's with the *6. So
yes, can you see my comment?
We'll scroll a little bit here.
I'm still typing, but can you see?
Oh, no, if you're still typing, we won't see it until you push send.
Oh, okay.
So if you're on the line, can you want to just make a comment now?
Yeah, I was typing in that I think that a general reminder to the classroom, reiterating the classroom expectations for etiquette be made publicly so that all could be reminded without singling Adam out and put him in the spotlight so as not to embarrass Adam. And that can also be spoken to privately so that he can be made aware of how his behavior was affecting others, because he may not have been aware of how his behavior was affecting others. So I think that addressing it publicly but all letting Adam know privately would be effective in handling this situation.
So do you want to make a comment?
Those are very good ideas, and I want to underscore what you said that he... I'm sorry, I was beginning to make a comment. Did I get cut out?
No, you're there.
Okay. What I was going to say, that the last scholar who spoke, absolutely right. Both of those ideas are very good, but I wanted to underscore your comment about Adam may not be aware of behavior. And for many of us, we go, how could he not? Yeah, I can tell you from my experience and maybe from your own that students are coming into our classrooms now with awareness about what some of the proper etiquette is, what good manners are, and so sometimes having that private meeting to talk about the expectations can be very useful.
Okay. I'm going to, Shanda, is that your hand raised?
Rashida?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we called on Rashida. So I think Cindy, it looks like we have everybody in the... I have another burning comment or hand raised here. I think we'll move. And I see Tessa has put a light bulb on, which I guess I'm
If you don't have any questions, can we please ask that you put your hands down and also remove the icons? We just want to make sure that if you have a question, we're able to get to you, but it can sometimes be a little challenging if you're there's other things going on in the feedback. feedback section. So again, unless you have a question, please put your hands down. And when you put it back up, we'll be sure to take a break and call on questions when we have the opportunity.
Okay, great, thanks. And maybe we can put some of these comments and put them in the discussion forum, because some of you had some really nice comments, and Cindy's going to highlight some of these strategies that you've suggested as well. So we'll be sure that we capture as much of this as we can. So Cindy, I think we're ready to move ahead.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, good work. Impressive. We're going to talk a little bit about stress and its contribution to student academic performance. You may be aware of the student survey that's conducted every year, and it's by the way, when Dr. Billings mentioned at the beginning that website, if you go on there and click on resources, I believe it is on the publication link, there's a long reading list, and it does include these sites. So at any rate, you can see right smack dab at the top, stress is the number one barrier to student performance. In the center there, when we're talking about depression, when we see a 6% increase over the last several years, this is troubling. More and more of our students are coming into higher education with diagnosable mental illnesses, substance abuse, and other problems. Depression chief among them, and many of them, because of the compromised healthcare services within higher ed, many students do not able to perhaps get treated, or if they are treated and maybe they're using medicine, can only afford part of their medicine. Also, they're maybe non-compliant with it. So, and one of the major findings out of the Virginia Tech report was that we needed to have far greater resources for student mental health issues than we do at present. And then this slide can read at leisure, but I thought it was important to underscore a couple of points. Nearly 100% of our students feel emotionally exhausted. 15% so depressed they were incapable of functioning at a level. And I don't know if you've read Twengay's book, but it's quite interesting. It's called Generation Me, M-E. She talks about the narcissism of college students coming into higher education. And it's quite a provocative book, but one of the things that she talks about is the empirical science that she's done on what stressors our college students face. And so you can see them there, deadlines and exams and so forth. And her basic thesis is written in red that when self-esteem is threatened, because the major thesis of her book is that we have created generations of narcissistic students by having what we call an overabundance of self-esteem, esteeming. As an example, every kid on the soccer team gets a trophy. There might be 8 or 9 valedictorians because we don't want to upset anybody, and different. So that's sort of her premise. And she said when we threaten their self-esteem, it can lead to anger and retaliation. And so I was interested in a number of studies to say, well, what about nursing students? Is it true? Is it the same for them? And some of the things are quite similar, but you'll see there that burnout is these were kind of summary stressors from multiple studies where students are saying there's just too much to do with work, school, family, and all of that. And you overlay that into a high-stakes academic environment where there's tremendous competition and now financial stress. And then, interestingly, many of them talked about the incivility that exists in nursing education. And so they talked about how these factors can lead to cheating, exhaustion, and burnout. I mentioned I was going to talk about cheating a little later. I do have a slide on that, so I'm going to keep going. These also I encourage you to read at your leisure, but we're seeing more and more students coming into higher education with psychological and emotional disorders, learning disabilities. Many of them are underprepared, and when the economy tanked, say 18 months ago or so, we saw an upsurge in admission applications into nursing programs because, quote, that was the only job that people could get. And so, and we're also seeing a higher mean age of students coming in, so more of a non-traditional student body in nursing education. I want to mention the last point there. This is finding coming out of K-12, so the K-12 system where they're talking about the No Child Left Behind Act of 2000 and how this has had a very negative impact, they believe, on student learning. And because everything is so prescriptive and must be taught to the test, so that we see our students now coming into higher education, and how many times we heard, just tell me what I need to know, just tell me what's on the test. And we find that sort of, to some extent, but this is a culture that K-12 colleagues have said has begun to be fostered in low grades. And this consumer mentality, you may have heard students talk about, you owe me an education, or I'm paying your salary. And frankly, higher education responding very often, calling students customers and trying to, quote, have a menu of services, much like we see in private organizations and enterprises. So we're going to pause again. And this is a raise your hand question. And we're going to talk about Carmen. And this is now, Carmen is in your clinical lab. And her performance is deteriorating. Patient care is suffering, bad decision making. You address it with her, and she says you're just picking on her, but she does agree to improve, but then she doesn't. And she's rarely attending, shows disdain, and verbally lashes out. So if you'd like to raise your hand to make a suggestion of how you might respond to Carmen.
Oh, let's see. I'm looking here. Go ahead and be prepared to give us a suggestion here. Yep.
Looks like Elisa.
Okay.
Brianne
yeah.
and
Munir as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And both of you, we'll start with Lisa first. To do your *6, so go ahead, Lisa, and then we'll call on Mira. Go ahead.
Yes. In the scenario, you make an agreement with her. My first suggestion is that any agreements that are made with students are made in writing. If she continues with the same behaviors and obviously breaks the agreement, my suggestion usually is to see if I can get her switched to another clinical, because it might be me that's due. Like we might not meld, personalities are different or something like that, to give the student benefit of the doubt to see if we can put her in an environment that's better for her learning. I have found that in the past that typically what happens is that the other instructor doesn't know what happened between me and the student. The same thing tends to happen with the other instructor.
Okay, should I respond, or do you just respond after each person or at the end?
Either way, if you would like to hear a few more and then make some general comments, that's fine. Or you choose. Go ahead.
Why don't I hear? Because it might be that other people want to build on that. So why don't we kind of wait till the end, and I'll make a couple comments.
Yeah. Okay. And Cindy, you're modeling for us a way of conducting discussion with students when we're trying to get many ideas out here on the table and not just respond to each one individually. So thank you for doing that here in this web environment. So Munira, yours, and then we'll go to Dr. McDermott.
I think one of the other concerns that I would have in dealing with Carmen is to find out what's going on with her. Clearly, we've already had a conversation. One of the things that I might want to do is see if she has other close friends who might know if there are some personal issues that have resulted in this behavior. What's her past record? Is this something she's done before? Is this new behavior for her? Has she reached out to her advisor perhaps? I would like to get a sense of what's going on with the student almost before I talk to her, because I would like to talk to her again and have another conversation saying, we spoke 2 weeks ago, we had these agreements, and your behavior has not improved. Can you tell me what's going on? Are there issues I should be aware of? And at that point, if I feel that she's not really responding, then I think I would reiterate my behavioral expectations for her. These are the expectations I have. These are the consequences to these behaviors. I think that might maybe refocus the student. I think it also gives the student an avenue to let me know perhaps if there are personal issues that I might need to be aware of, and then we could work together from there. She might need to be referred to student services, to counseling, and knowing a little bit more about her, I wouldn't be able to make any of these referrals for her.
Okay, there's two more hands. One's Dr. McDermott. We'll go to you next, and then Dr. Kamiansky. So remember, star 6 to unmute.
Okay, Mary Ann McDermott. I did unmute, I think.
Yeah, you're there.
Yeah. One of the things, and I agree with everything that the scholars said, and I think they're insightful. But one of the things that just jumped out at me is patient care has suffered and decision making is suspect, and to me that is patient safety, and that, as a faculty, also a bigger, I think, a higher responsibility than the student. So somehow that student's behavior has to be brought into a place where the patient is always safe. That's a ethical and legal issue that sits on top of any student's right. And this, as a faculty, this is where I'm coming from. Then in some of these interactions, perhaps instead of us saying what we want from the student, which is all important, what is the student willing to do to rectify her behavior? Those are just comments.
Yeah, thank you. I have one more from Dr. Kamiansky, and then we'll pass it back to Cindy for some other comments. Go ahead.
Okay. Everybody's alluded to this, but since you're there once, behavior has deteriorated. We are healthcare professionals, and I really were able to say something's wrong here. And I personally would refer for evaluation right now. I think her behavior has gone beyond let's chat, have a discussion with her, but I think she needs to be referred for an evaluation because of safety for her and for her colleagues and for all of us. I think that of the things that we have seen explode, and I hate to talk about the other universities with their shootings and things, we have really errant behavior here, deteriorating, and I think I would want to do more than chat with her and refer her and not allow her in the clinical until she has been so seared. That would be my response to this. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we'll toss it back over to you now.
Okay, wow. First of all, very good. Very good. Some of the suggestions you made, I'd like to comment on. And many of them rely on having a clear and comprehensive and helpful policy and procedure. And that's one of the things I know is lacking in many institutions is what is the procedure, how do we follow this? We might one for conflict resolution, as some of you kind of alluded that, you would have a way of resolving the conflict. Those often exist, and student codes of conduct often exist, but having clear policies to address this kind of behavior is really helpful. Publishing it, making it aware, making it transparent, discussing it with students that first day of classes can also be helpful. One of you mentioned to go, whatever it is that you do, whether it's a conversation, a written referral to student health services or whatever, I really liked your thoughts about circling back, going back to the student and seeing how the performance is improving. The person who suggested patient safety, absolutely. That's really what we're talking about here. And so how can we have a conversation with the student, either alone or with someone from our student affairs department who, by the way, are trained for these kinds of things, to help meet with that student and mediate the problem. I'd like to make one additional comment, and it didn't really come up in the discussion, but the role of the nursing or academic supervisor, whatever, what role do they play? Very often, and I think it might be in a future slide, where people often complain that the leadership is ineffective. And I just recently did a study to find out how true is that. And what we're finding instead is that the leadership isn't always sure of how to proceed either. So it's not for lack of wanting to be involved. It's, hello?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay, some kind of weird beep on my line.
Those people muting and unmuting their lines.
Huh?
Those individuals muting and unmuting their lines.
Oh, okay. So all I was going to say is that supervisors can definitely benefit by generating and implementing policies. Information, you guys. Good job. Go forward.
Yeah, move on. Looking.
Okay, and I think we're doing pretty well for time. So the next set of slides we'll kind of flush through quickly. Again, if you want to read this study, it's in Advances in Nursing Science. It really is talking about, this was a national study, by the way, not a local study. It was nursing, I think about 500 and some nursing faculty and students from 43 or 44 states. I can't remember exactly. And it was a mixed method study. And this particular paper is the qualitative. And one of the main discoveries from that work, that study, was that stress plays an important role, a critical role in civility. And in this case, and we'll talk later about faculty, but in the case of students, their attitude of entitlement. So just kind of summarizing a little bit of the findings, faculty reported that student stress is a major factor. So this is what faculty say about students. And I did not ask this question specifically, which was very interesting. It was a surreptitious finding. When I asked why, I basically asked why do students contribute to, how do they contribute? And overwhelmingly, stress was the number one factor. And stress related to these main themes about and juggling multiple roles in competition. Interestingly, the students said that pretty much the same thing. So back to faculty for a second. Here's what faculty said. Look what's said. Almost exactly the same. Now, the third theme, though, not identified by faculty, because guess what? We don't always know this is happening, but students do. And many said they felt compelled to cheat. This was an interesting discovery because this was coming from stories, narrative stories that students and faculty told. And students said most of the cheating was not so much in the classroom, though that happened. It was more in the clinical site, and that's what was really troubling to me. For example, students would make up blood sugars, or they might make up blood pressures, or they might make up other kinds of things, saying they changed a dressing when they didn't, because they were fearful that if they came forward and said they actually had not checked the blood sugar or whatever, that they would be reprimanded and maybe even dismissed from the program. So many of them talked about their fear of being found out, and so they would make stuff up. And then faculty also reported the students' attitude of entitlement, saying that students assume this know-it-all attitude, consumer mentality, and feel as though we owe them an education. Instantly, students said very similar things. They also identified an attitude of entitlement, refusing to accept personal responsibility, their own consumerism and making a lot of excuses. And so then I asked the question, what do students do? What are the most frequently reported student behaviors? And these were the top 3 that were themes or groups of behaviors identified by faculty. And it's no surprise that these sort of irritating behaviors, cell phone use and texting and so forth, but these other kinds of activities, anti-faculty blogging and mobbing, happening in cyberspace out of our realm of knowledge very often. And sites that you may be aware of, like rateprofessor.com and other things like that, students are mobbing and blogging online, and we may not be aware of it. And then this lack of respect or regard and retaliating, and this was interesting, faculty said that students retaliate against perceived faculty incivility. And we'll talk later about what the faculty incivilities were that were identified, what it is that we do, in other words, that trouble other faculty and students. Students said very similar behaviors, the disruption, the rudeness, pressuring faculty to agree to demands, but this was different. This also might be outside of the realm of faculty knowing more about, which is that students said, no, students go out and they badmouth us to other students, they badmouth our school, and so forth in the practice setting and in the public setting, as well as within the academy. This is a brand new, I recently had just the greatest opportunity to do an all-day workshop with a number of students in a school in a large western state. And one of the things we did lots of free writes and a lot of interactive activities that day, but one of the things I asked the students to do is write down for me what the most important factor was or is to help them deal with incivility. And so doing a theme analysis, these were the top 4 responses. Students said they first go to family and friends and then classmates, but this third area of support of faculty and support of nursing staff I thought was quite interesting because it demonstrates the key and crucial role that those of us play in helping students deal with these kinds of encounters. And I'll just say for a moment, what we didn't have time for is to talk about my background. My background is psych mental health. I'm an adolescent and family therapist. A good deal of my work has been done with violent youth. And I had to be reminded when I worked with gangs and so forth that we were dealing with about 5% of the kids who committed 80% of the crimes. And remember, and how it helps me think about this, is that when we're talking about uncivil faculty, we're often talking about a very small percent who make it very bad and very toxic for the rest of us. But we do matter, and being supportive to students can be very helpful. So that was one of the main conclusions out of multiple studies, which is that we do play a key role in helping students to stay in school and to complete their nursing education. One of the reasons that Dr. Billings gave was a link to Reflections on Nursing Leadership. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but it's my personal story as a young nursing student dealing with faculty incivility, and it really also draws the same conclusion, even from something that happened to me 30 years ago, that it was a very supportive faculty that changed my life and kept me in nursing education and why I'm here today, honestly. We'll talk real quickly about faculty, because incivility is not a one-way street. There are lots of challenges for faculty, for those of us, and this is Shirey's work. She is a nurse. She writes mostly about anger and burnout and stress, and when you read this study, she talks about we're stressed out over a lot of different things, promotion and tenure. This third bullet point of trying to maintain clinical and teaching competence all at the same time, and said that there's a certain number of us who are at risk, particularly if we're new to the teaching role, that we have limited support, not quite hardy, yet we hold very high standards in very difficult circumstances. And finding really is that we have to deal with faculty stress and burnout, or we will lose more during the time of faculty shortage. And then own work, looking at what stresses faculty out, you see it's very consistent. Many faculty are being told that in order to stay in the academy, they need to pursue a doctoral degree. Again, this promotion and tenure. And the number two, so many of us who are not as young as our students, let's say, may have some difficulty keeping pace with technology. I mean, I have teenagers, and my kids, just fly through sites and literally born with a mouse in their hand. For those of us who weren't, it can be kind of a struggle. And so back to the same study that I referenced earlier, I want to now look at the faculty side of the study. And so two major findings: that stress and faculty attitude of superiority contributed to incivility in this national study. So faculty stress, and here in that study is what we found to be most stressful: workloads, multiple roles, and so forth. I think it's interesting, my asterisks there, that students did not report stress as a major factor. Now, in subsequent studies they have, which is interesting, but in this one they did not, though faculty found it to be a major contributor. Then I have faculty, what other things contribute? And overwhelmingly, this attitude of superiority, where some faculty exert their position, their power. I've written a paper called Student Perceptions of Incivility in Nursing Education, application of the concept of rankism. Rankism as defined by the abuse of power and authority over others to diminish them. And so I drew a conclusion that this attitude of superiority is much like the rankism that Dr. Full talks about. And then this attitude of superiority, students also saw it, saying that they were being often threatened to be killed or dismissed, and not really feeling like faculty accepts or values the experience that they do bring to nursing education. I'll sideline for just a second here to say that our incoming class at Boise State, and maybe you are having similar entrants coming into your programs, we have 2 PhD students and we have several master's students in other disciplines coming in to pursue a degree in nursing education, a bachelor's degree. So then asking what were the uncivil faculty behaviors, you see them here: intimidation, not good teachers, and not good at classroom management. This is what faculty is saying about us. And very often, we'll see that we'll bring clinicians into the academy that really have not been schooled, and no intended, but not have been schooled in how to teach or to manage the classroom. And then students also said, very similar kinds of things, that they are often bullied and demeaned and so forth. And so one of the conclusions from that national study was you take a lot of stress and you take poor coping, it creates a potential for the dance of incivility. Now, this is a busy slide. I only wanted to mention it to the extent that this is a conceptual model that I've begun to develop to look at how stress plays a role in both fostering incivility and fostering civility. And so we do as much as we can learn about classroom management to deal with and seize opportunities and to manage them well, then the more likely it is we will create a culture of civility.
Cindy,
and the consequence.
before that
yes.
slide, I just
Yes.
point out to the students what Cindy's really doing here is helping us get a testable model for developing the best practices of how to deal with invalidity and how to help students and faculty prevent it. So this is kind of, you can say differently, Cindy, but this looks like it's kind of the culmination of a lot of preliminary studies that she has now been able to come to a model, and all of this can be tested. And this is how we're learning in developing our science of nursing education to learn the best practices. So thanks, Cindy, for letting me harp on that.
No, glad you did, and you're absolutely right. This is a culmination of preliminary work, and I have begun to test it. And the model is holding up quite well.
Great.
So I encourage other folks to test it as well, and also begin to revise it. Because if we don't, then here are some of the key consequences. Problems with the relationship, the learning environment, potential violence, increased stress, and impact on the practice setting, which say I'm engaged in data analysis right now on a major study where I asked nurses in practice. I think I have about 250 nurses in practice. They're leaders, mostly administrators and nurse managers, asking them the overarching research question of how can nursing practice and nursing education work together to foster civility in the practice setting. And the preliminary findings are so illuminating, and so hopefully we'll get that out in one of the journals here pretty soon. But meanwhile, I'm working with 2 undergraduate research assistants where I'm teaching them how to do qualitative and quantitative analysis. So it's slowing me down a little bit, but it's a total blast. I'm having a lot of fun with it. So hopefully learn more from that study. Okay, one of my favorite cases, Professor Green. So is a look at us. Professor Green, often late for class, disorganized, strays from the material, doesn't grade papers or exams on time, change due dates, doesn't give notice, refuses to discuss any of this with her students when they raise concerns. So, as a last-ditch effort, several of Dr. Green's students have come collectively to you, a trusted faculty member, complain about their issues with Professor Green. So, doctoral students, if you will make suggestions on how to intervene.
Okay, and again, this is, we're working that text box down there in the chat section at the very bottom, and apparently we need to have you send it to the host presenters and panelists, and you're typing there, and then when you're done, push this button, and we'll receive it. And after the doctoral students have a moment to respond, we can certainly open it up for other comments and questions. So.
And it may send to us, Diane. I can then resend it to the large group as well.
Okay, great. That'd be great, Nick. Thank you.
No.
Okay. So we'll give everybody just kind of a minute to think how to handle this. And this, to me, is this kind of a universal situation. I think all of us that have been teaching for a while, we've had students come to us with comments about another faculty member. So kind of in the of the dance of civility, it kind of takes on some new meaning.
Hello, can I?
Yes.
I can't write in this box. I had it sent to hoster, presenter, and but there's no way to write in this box.
Who's speaking?
Okay.
Lucille Joel. I can't write it in it either.
Where in the send to section?
And you have to type in the little white box at the very bottom. Yeah. Then you'll be able to type it in.
Yeah. Oh, very bottom. Okay, I got it.
Bottom,
all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. See the send button. You're done. You need to make your screen bigger, enlarge it. Sometimes if you're not getting the full bottom of your screen, that could be an issue. Catherine for us.
I have to thank my husband.
Oh, okay.
He's no.
They're handy guys, aren't they?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so type. And if we're typing, we'll Glenn will be here in just a minute, but we'll give you another second or two because I'm sure you have quite a bit to say here. Shift them. Okay, has posted back something that everybody should be able to see now. And Cindy, you see what's coming over here to you as well?
Yeah, I'm reading from Elisa. Elisa, thank you. If you can hear me, appreciate that you read those articles and see some correlation to what we're talking about. Thank you.
Yes, it didn't my whole cut and paste. I have to figure out what part's missing.
Okay. Well, again, that's and give Cindy a little time to look at these and respond on the fly here. But
yeah, let me have another minute.
Sure. Okay, and those of you that don't have your mute button on, be sure we have *6, and then when we want, we'll open it up for some discussion and a little bit after Cindy's had a time to respond here.
Okay. Do you mind if go ahead and make a comment?
I think so.
First of all, there really nice and very helpful if each department or school of nursing or however you described can have what are called cultural norms you've all agreed on to abide by and to use. And when we get to the what now what, I think I have some more on that, but this is one of the things that helps me. Our very first norm in our department is that we must assume goodwill. When we assume goodwill, that's not to say that the students aren't accurate or don't have a legitimate issue to raise, but it cognitively puts me in a different frame of mind if I say, wow, Professor Green, what could be going on? If this is true, what could be, I'm saying in my head, what could be the issue here? And how can we assume goodwill both on the part of the students that are bringing us this information and our colleagues? And so then thinking about the most respectful intervention, maybe one idea, and I don't know, maybe somebody has written this since I began to comment, but rather than have the collective group of students and you speak with Dr. Green, you might first check it out with her, which I think some of you suggested, and without mentioning, exactly what's going on, because we have another norm that's called, you're going to think this is cheesy, but it works, take mail to the right address. In other words, if I assume goodwill and I have some colleague that may be needing support, I now want to go directly to that colleague and say, some issues have come to my attention in the spirit of being helpful to you. Are there things going on that I might be helpful with? That's one way. Another way might be to ask if one of the students could be a representative, also go with you, and the two of you set up a meeting. And told me recently, and I really like to quit, there are no such things as academic emergencies. Okay, about that. There may be behavioral emergencies, but no such thing as academic emergencies. For instance, is an academic emergency? No. It needs to be addressed, but being thoughtful to set up an appointment, to bring some things written down, to alert Dr. Green as to what you'd like to discuss and so forth, may be a good way to do this. I see many of you talked about being not judgmental until all the information is in. Pause there for you to respond to some of that and some of the other student writings.
Okay, well, do it with a raise of hands, and I think anybody that didn't have an opportunity to comment there in the chat box, please feel free to raise your hand. And Cindy, I see that Sheila Lintz has hand raised. So Sheila, can we call on you?
Hear me?
Yes.
Hello? I didn't. I had my hand raised, but you can call on me.
Okay.
And in this case, I wrote that I would speak with the professor in a totally non-judgmental manner. I also don't like keeping secrets. I things to be pretty much, this is what's come to my attention, and then hear what the other teacher has to say to see, what can happen, if she can, or if I could help her in some manner, or if this is even true. But the idea of sometimes of splitting is something I try to avoid, and I would try to avoid making it personal and just address the problems that have come to my attention, and work with the teacher and to see what kind of help that the teacher might need, or what the teacher's perception of it is.
Yeah, one of the very first questions I ask students if they come with these kinds of concerns is I say, what did Dr. Green say when you had a meeting with her? In other words, they may not have even had a conversation. They may just, you're right, may be coming to you, and you don't want to get caught in that split.
Right.
So, and often if they've said, well, we really haven't talked to her, we want to talk to her first. Okay, what is it that you were hoping I could help you with? And I have, and I'm sure some of you have, role-played with students to then be able to go directly to Professor Green and have that, crucial conversation, if you will. Those of you who have picked up the need to not be in a split, that's exactly right. So really be more on an information, to find out what's true and what isn't true is very essential.
Okay, Cindy, I see we have, thanks. You can put your hand down and mute, and then I see Rashida has her hand raised, so we'll call on her next. And Rashida, unmute yourself if you need to do that. So, Ed?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, in a way, I'm agreeing with Dr. Clark that I wrote down that the students should be encouraged to meet with the professor privately to review the course expectations, which should be outlined in the syllabus. The syllabus can be viewed as a contract between the professor and the student, so whatever the expectations were, I think everybody should be going by the syllabus, which should have been clear in the beginning of the class. So if you meet privately with the professor, all of that can be talked about.
Thank you. Cindy, do you want to make a comment? But then I see that Dr. Joel wishes to speak too. So,
I think what Sheeta said is very good, because those are things that you might want to address that very first day. How we do conflict, if you will. And I would take it a step further. What I do with my students, and perhaps you do as well, that's a lot more, it makes a bigger impression, is to, in addition to reviewing, I walk them through it and say to them, okay, what if you have an issue with me? What will be the first thing you do? And they have the students actually talk through every single step of what they would do with our conflict negotiation process. You know, and I usually start with, what if you have an issue with another professor or another student? What might you do? And walk through it. And then I up the ante with them and say, okay, what are you going to do if the issue is with me? What will you do then? And then walk them through it again. And then I say to my students, if you have an issue with me, please bring it forward, because it will be an opportunity for all of us to work through it to a successful conclusion, because you will be doing this in the practice setting every single day. So you're right, you know, address it and then roll it out and play it out.
Oh, great, Cindy, thanks. Good there. And I ask again, Dr. Joel, do you want to, is there a comment you have for us, or is your hand, do we need?
Oh, Leal. It's Leal. Even though there's no phone icon, I don't know where that went, but I'm on the phone. Okay. I think many of these solutions are good. I think first you have to try preventatively. And I would agree, every class, I tell the students, you have an issue with me, I'm good to hear it. And I give them doing it, but since our classes are large, faculty have office hours, but they're not always convenient. They have my email, they have my home phone, and they do call. So first of all, I want the preventive work. Secondly, if they came to me about someone else, I send them right back to that person after talking to them and talking out. Students have very demanding expectations sometimes today. I've been teaching for 4 years, and they've accelerated dramatically. So I would talk to them, and I want description. I want them really to describe to me what's happening, but ultimately I want them to go back to the source with a clear mind. 2 other points. I would not get involved meeting with students with this professor. First, there's no insinuation from the case that you have up here that I have any authority. And you don't just drag in another faculty member and students. There's always what I call the possibility of innocent retaliation. And that can come back to haunt those students and the professor later on. We've had many grievances of that type. And with you, you can route to the professor as a friend, even tell them that it's come to your attention that some of the students have problems. Never mention a name, and you really have no authority to help. But you can try. And that's
so. Thanks, Lucille, Cindy. Comments, and then I don't see any. Oh, Tammy, we have one comment. So, Cindy, do you want to respond to Dr. Joel, or get a comment from Tammy? Either way.
Let's hear Tammy.
Okay. Unmute.
Hello.
Hey.
Tammy. I just wanted to say they were very valid points. I didn't kind of think of it from the perspective of the student actually speaking to the professor, which is what you're supposed to always do. But sometimes we get so upset about not getting grades back right away or, in a timely manner that we want to speak to someone else. So I think that was a very good point that we need to actually reach out to that professor and see if there's something that we don't know about or something that, we can know about. Innocent retaliation I've been a victim of, so I know how that goes. Very good points, and I have to remember to look at it from all perspectives.
Okay, great. So I'll put it back to you. I don't see any other hands, so comment and we can move ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I think a lot of what you're saying is true. So much is knowing your own culture and having the conversations in your staff and faculty meetings. Having some of these things and having these conversations. Feel free to rip off my case studies and say, what would we do in this situation? What would this look like? How do we do classroom warming? And just really having open discussions so that everyone has a thought about where each is coming from. And I can't stress enough the importance of having norms that faculty and staff follow.
Okay, everybody please mute your line. *6 to mute. So Cindy, you can, are you now?
Good to go. You guys want to roll through this? This is like my favorite part. So,
all right.
Cut several slides out for time, and so if there would be examples posted, they already are. If we come to something and you're not really sure, for an example of what it might be, please check that other slideshow.
Yeah, Cindy, it's to tell the scholars, it's the original one that you have copied down from in the WebEx discussion. It's there with module. It's the original slide set. So all of the clear examples that Cindy's provided are right there for you.
Okay. But for today's slideshow, we've eliminated those to just get to sort of the meat of things. Okay. There we go. So let's just go back for a moment. So how are we going to address these issues? And these are the topics that I'd like to go through. We won't have time to drill down real deeply, but I want to be able to at least crest the waves and talk about each of them at least briefly and then leave time for discussion. So because stress plays such an important role, it is very important that we find ways to not only deal with our own stress and to do self-care, but to be talking about it with our students. One of this slide, by the way, is one that I take to my students each semester, and maybe I pop it up a couple times during the semester, and just have conversations about how things are going. How are you reducing your stress? Is there something on here that you would add that I haven't added? Tell them that I use this slide with people in my workshops, so they're very deliberate about it. In fact, the last two, Declutter and Enjoy Your Favorite Music, were added by my spring semester 2010 students, who said, they and it was and this doesn't take a lot of time, but I can feel the stress of the stress level of my students dropping as we begin to talk about ways for stress reduction. It's also very important to make available to students all of the resources on campus, from Women's Center to health services to stress management and so forth, and letting students know what those are and having those readily available for them. Communication is highly important. I teach leadership and management as my primary teaching assignment, but conversation and communication is essential to every single course, whether it be clinical, didactic, or whatever, and generally is a major outcome for the program. So really making transparent how we'll be communicating in our classes and then role modeling that for students, teaching them how to communicate. One of the ways we do that is nonverbally. How do we role model? Not only in our language and how we speak to others, but how we dress, how we conduct ourselves, how we respond, if we keep appointments and office hours. And then each of us needs to be clear with students what our response time is. For example, for each of us that will be different. Some of us teach exclusively online. Some of us teach hybrid, which is live and online. At least that's what we call it. And sometimes it's all live. But letting students know when their papers will be due back, or their exams or whatever, what the expectations are for email response time, whether you'll be available during the weekends or not. And so I think that helps a lot of students to know where you're coming from. And getting to know the students. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment when we talk about the first day of class, which is the first day of class to me is the most essential time, absolutely, that we can spend trying to prevent these things from happening. And I think it was one of the last folks who spoke, maybe Dr. Joel, who I don't recall, but one of you suggesting that prevention is the key element here. And so in that positive learning environment, I'm going to try to bring this to life in a webinar, but think about your first day of class, whether you're online or in the classroom. But I'm going to imagine or ask you to imagine that your first day of class in your live classroom. And all of these, in principle, can also be done online. But, for example, it's the first day of class. A lot of students don't know always where the classrooms are. So arrive early. Get there early, and be in the, have everything set up, and you're dressed nicely. You're ready to go. You're out in the hallway, and you're reading students as they come along. Oh, are you here for Nurse 424? Great. I'm Dr. Clark. You're at the right place. So you're beginning to make contact immediately. I also pass out large index cards. I believe they're like 8x5 index cards.
Call in and you can.
We have people mute. *6, please. I'm here. Somebody in their office or someplace where we can hear. So, *6, please. Thank you. Go, Andy.
And so one of the reasons I like to be passing something out to students is because you're touching them without touching them, if that makes sense. So that you've now made a connection. You can ask them their name. Maybe you already know them from another class or whatever. But to greet them as they come in, role modeling that welcoming openness into your classroom. And eventually, those cards that you've given them will be folded in half, like you see on the slide with John Smith. And I have markers, actually, that I pass out that are my personal markers for students to write their name on. Now, the reason I like to do that is because my markers I have had since I started teaching at Boise State, believe it or not. And so what I say to my students when I'm passing them out is that these are really magical markers, because every student before them and today has touched these markers. And, again, sort of making that connection with students, however, maybe that's hokey for you, but finding your own way to make that personal connection with a student in a professional manner. So at some point, we're going to have them, let me see what my next slide is. Let me go, because prior to delving into the syllabus, we're going to be asking students to stand up and introduce themselves and, tell a little bit what isn't in your slides, or maybe it is. One of the examples I use for my students is the one I used this past spring, was to have students stand up and introduce themselves with their full name and respond to the following: if I could change the world, I would. It's amazing how quickly you get insight or a window into that student's lived experience and where they're coming from. So I'm having them do their name tense, and I'm having them talk a little bit about themselves before we get into the content of the course. Some point we're going to be talking about the syllabus, and in my syllabus and maybe in your own, there's a lot of ways that you can just put quick links into the syllabus so that it's not so long. For example, you can link to the Student Code of Conduct. You can link to, for us, we have what's called a Statement of Shared Values. So we can have the students be able to link actively into their syllabus and go straight to those websites. So the way I kind of like to do it is I start out from macro to micro and ask the students to think about, and I do this in a really quick slideshow, ask the students to think about what the vision and the mission is for our university. Why do we even exist? And for us, as in many institutions, we talk about issues of inclusion and civility, and then taking them straight down into and drilling into the classroom. Let me illustrate. So I say, here's the vision for the university. Here's our statement of shared values. Here's how the College of Health Sciences lives those shared values. And another thing we do, and this is I think in your slides, I'm the coordinator for the cluster of leadership and management courses for our school, and so we team teach clinical. And so I have organized with my team to develop a team teaching philosophy that we publish right into our syllabus. And I don't know, I'm going to ask if you have that in front of you by any chance in your hard copy. It says Nursing, Leadership, and Management Teaching Team Philosophy. Is it that?
I think if you do, just raise your hand, and if not, it's in the slide set. It's posted in the discussion forum document. The document.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason that's kind of cool is for students to recognize the importance of teams coming together to collaborate on making meaning out of why we even have a teaching team and how our teaching team works together. And it's really brief. If you have time later, you can go look for it. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines where we our vision, mission, and philosophy as a team teaching group. And then we also, when I teach solo in my theory class, I also publish my own teaching philosophy. Now I know a lot of you have personal and individual team teaching philosophies because we all need to do them for promotion and tenure. Plus, it's just the right thing to do. And many of those philosophies are really long. They're long. But I can shrink wrap on mine that's just a couple of paragraphs that becomes the springboard. Because when you ask students what they want to know a couple of things. They want to know what to call us. I mean, they want to know, are we Dr. Clark? Are we Cindy? Who are we? How do we want to be addressed? And they want to know what we want and where we're coming from. So if we can speak directly about our teaching philosophy, and you don't have mine in front of you, I'll just read 1 or 2 lines. My teaching philosophy begins with the line that says, I thoroughly enjoy teaching, interacting with
students and engaging in the learning process. So right there, you're telling students what you're all about. You can develop that a little bit more, give an example perhaps. And then my second paragraph, I talk about how my job is to help lead the discussion to have great academic debates, because the role of nursing is to find our voice and to advocate not only for our patients but for the profession, and that the only way we're able to successfully do that is if we do it in a civil manner. And then what that does is leads to our discussion of our department norms, and I put them right up on the screen and say, this is what our norms are about. This is how we conduct ourselves in the Department of Nursing as faculty. Then I say, and now it's our turn, and we go into developing norms for our classroom and then later for our clinical. So I'm going to pause there for just a moment to see what, because I've been talking about tests there. I want to stop and get some comments or some thoughts on what I said, or ways that you've done it differently or similarly.
Okay, we'll start this discussion again by having you raise your hand, and we'll call on you. And while you're pulling your thoughts together, I would note that many of you are taking or have taken a curriculum course. And in that course, I'm sure you're talking about how to prepare a syllabus. So you can either go back to what you learned last semester when you took the course. And some of you, I know, did develop a course. Double check you have it in that syllabus. And for those that are taking the course this semester, here's your chance to be sure, and if you're developing your own, to think about some of these points. So seeing any hands raised, I don't think. Oh, sorry. Sheila, go ahead. Want to unmute, *6. Feel free to.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
hi.
Great.
I always seem to have the same problem that goes on, and that's the use of computers in class. And we talk about that on the first day. And I'm not teaching right now, but I do think that that's going to become a bigger focus when I return to teaching, because there are students who rightly feel that they should have access to their computers. They type on their computers. They're used to using them. On the other hand, there are students who are flipping to Facebook, and it's very distracting. And so
I'd like to respond to that.
Okay.
I
wish we had kept. This is Cindy.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
We had kept those other slides, because I'd love to show you an example, but you'll have an opportunity to look at some of the slides that were included in this particular slide set. But one of the things we do, Sheila and others, is we have quite a conversation about what's accepted. My classroom norms for this semester that the students generated were actually written on the computer by one of my students. I often do it on the whiteboard and then have it written down. Hello? And then usually type them up and bring them to the students. Well, this semester we had such a good discussion about the use of computers in class that we said this would be a very good use of computers. If you would like to write down the classroom norms, someone can email them to me, Dr. Clark, and I'll make them available to all students. So that's what we did, but we had a very careful conversation about what our norms were. One of our norms was that I'm reading verbatim of what my students said. Computers are okay in class as long as they are related to class. And so I said, well, what about when students maybe check their Facebook or trade on eBay? Is that acceptable? Oh, no, it's not. And I said, well, how will we police that? Because I can't be everywhere. The students agreed that because it was a class norm, they would gently remind their neighbors that being on Facebook was not acceptable. We really did not have a single computer problem this semester, nor have I had them in past semesters, when we have established clear norms and each of the students know that we're all responsible for abiding by the norm. Another example, and I'm reading verbatim, cell phones must be on vibrate in our class. Make every effort to minimize distractions and disruptions in class time. And then the students decided, sit near the door if you're expecting a call, and texting only if necessary and short. So what the students said is sometimes if they have an ill child or an ill parent, they're too distracted if they don't have their cell phone on, and they sit at the door and exit quietly and enter quietly. So really the point is that having good workable norms that everyone has agreed to, and then what I do, and you may like to do this as well, is I type them up on a little 3x5 card and I pass them out to my students the very next class and say, these are so important that we need to bring them every class, and we need to put them out on our desk with our name tag so everybody knows who we are, and that we know that we're abiding by the norms. And we do that. And I do it myself. They see me walk into class, put my name tag, and you know, of course they know who I am. I'm trying to role model. It's the importance of each person knowing who we are and having the norms set right out in front of us. And then we also establish clinical norms, because our clinicals are probably much like yours, you know, about 10 students in a clinical, so it's a much smaller group.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I don't see any other hands raised, so I think we can move ahead.
You're absolutely right about computers. We need to be dealing with them for sure. What isn't also there, I wanted to also mention the importance of having a behavioral outcome, okay, or objectives or course competencies, whatever your program calls them. What I mean by that is that whatever content you teach, you're going to have course objectives related to that content, whether it's Mother B or Psych or whatever it is. I encourage you, and it also is in your other handout that's posted, to borrow some that I've established. For example, one behavioral objective reads something like, this is the one this semester, by the way, demonstrates accountability for one's own personal and professional conduct, which reflect the standards, values, and ethical behaviors of the profession or the discipline. What that does is I say to the students, you know, you may be passing all the course content related to Mother Baby or Psych or whatever, but you can't pass the course unless you're also behaving in a way that's conducive to the discipline, the profession. And so this gives you a behavioral hook to meet with students, which I have in the past. You know, you're doing great on this and this and this, but this one may be the one that keeps you from passing the course. How can we work together so that you can be successful on this objective? So I'd like to also see if there's any comments about that.
Okay, this is your chance to raise your hand, and we'll call on you. And if you're not speaking, be sure that your line is muted. Star 6. I'm beginning to feel like a recruiter here. 6. Okay. Cindy, I don't see anybody with a hand raised, so I'm assuming we're okay to move ahead. And we have
about
10 minutes,
okay.
And we have questions and answers time too. So if people can be thinking about anything they want to ask of you, we'll head to you too.
Fantastic. Beautiful. So let's talk about a few ways to prevent and intervene. We talked about the importance of that first day. But let's say that you have failed to make your group norms or failed to do some of the things you wanted to do, which, by the way, I meant to mention this earlier. So before I dive into that, I wanted to give you another thought about that first day and what I say to students, and you can also borrow something like this. When we're having our discussion about norming and expectations and conflict negotiation and so forth, each day that we're doing our norms, or that first day, I should say, the first day, I say, there will come a time this semester that I will probably offend you. That will never be my intent. So how will I know if I have offended you? Then, of course, the students come to the conclusion of, I have to let you know. Okay, how will you let me know? You know, by minute, I can write you a note, I can send you a polite email, and so forth. In other words, it's possible for each of us to know everything about every culture, about every religion, about every ethnicity, about everything. And so I realize that I will never intentionally do harm, but it is likely I might. So doing some of that is really helpful that first day as well. Suggestions for intervention. Someone mentioned earlier to generally address the behavior and refer to norms. That's exactly right. And I have to do that a lot, even though we norm and revisit them. It's just because we get into these lively discussions and people are interrupting one another. And sometimes I just have to say, wow, we are having such a great conversation, yet we're not really paying attention to each other. So let's remember we all said we were going to respect one another and talk one at a time. So that is a very useful strategy. If that's unsuccessful and you have one student who consistently is interfering or interrupting, then you also suggested that private meeting. That's very good. So in a non-judgmental way, talk about what might be going on. One way to do that is I often just will sit with a student and say, talk to me. What's going on? Rather than me now enumerating all the things that I may have documented or written down or observed. Give that student the opportunity to speak, and often they will. And usually it's related to some sort of stress, or, like we said before, maybe it's their the lack of self-awareness of knowing how they're coming across. And talk about the behaviors that you're seeing, and ask out options of how you might, how a student might improve. And you might also be out of your league. You might need to talk to the student affairs folks and connect students with resources. Maybe it's both, that you continue to stay connected with the student, but also help them by giving them a list of resources. Sometimes if now this is sort of when things just continue to escalate, it's really important that you do something, and often it's to call a break. And I just say, you know what, we all just need to take a 5-minute break. And it may be that you need to, and also I wanted to mention, it used to be that we used to send a student to go help if we needed to. That is no longer the standard. The standard now is that we could break and we go get help, unless, of course, it's an imminent situation where you would be dialing 911 and so forth. But I'm talking about the student who, is disrespectful, and you may just need to take a break. And the reason that we don't send a student to do it, you've already guessed, is that increases the likelihood of that student being targeted by the student. And so check policies to see how long you can ask a student to leave a day. Most policies, and I'm just speaking generally, are 2 days. You get involved with your supervisor and your student affairs folks immediately so that you can begin to make a plan to meet with that student. And usually there's a policy that explains who meets with the student and whether or not that student might ask student affairs rep to be there. The student affairs representative, in general, their what they're there for is to make sure that due process is followed. And I can't stress enough how important it is to partner with student affairs. You need to know who your student affairs representatives are. At our university, people say, "Oh, you have one person." No, I call his name Blaine, and I call Blaine the triage nurse of Civility. He functions very much like a triage nurse. We call him. He may not always be the person who's going to assist us in figuring things out, but he gets us to the right person. So know who those people are. Invite them to your staff and faculty meetings. Also find out who your campus police are. Every university, it's different. Some have their own campus security. We partner with Boise City Police, so know who those folks are. Invite them to your staff meetings. Ask them how they respond, how it might show an invisible show of force. In other words, if they need to be in your building, yet you don't want people to be, ignited by their presence, how they do that. So really making good relationships with those folks. And this final point on that slide is being absolutely certain that you spend a good deal of time on exit strategies. In other words, how are you going to assist this student if you have to ask them to leave the university or if they have failed a course? There are policies that students may be able to come back in, but I'm talking about when the student actually needs to either be failed from the program, removed from the program. Some universities do this really well. There's a school in another state where when they meet with that student, the very next person they meet with is their career center representative to help that student look at what strengths are, where they might be very good or where they might excel in a different discipline or a different course of study. So those are being implemented in organizations and corporations as well to stop the circling back of the agitated person coming in and causing, a dangerous situation. So I think brings us to dialogue and questions, and looks like we have about 5 minutes for that.
Yeah, 4 minutes. Cindy did it. Thank you. Let's have some questions here for Cindy. Any final wrap up, and then is your question and raising your hand? The last slide will be the assignment for the discussion form, and then what I would offer to do here is once we finish with this, those of you that want to, I'll say hang out after class. I'll be glad to stay online here for a few minutes. Cindy may as well. And anything that you want to do informal with us, we're happy to do that. And so I see Connie has raised her hand. Cindy, we're going to have a question for Connie for you. So Connie, unmute your line and go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Clark. That was really great. I think that in discussing stress management, I completely agree with you that we need to teach ourselves and our students how to do stress management so that we can teach it to our patients. I think the other side of the coin of stress management is also looking at what is causing the stress and looking at what we're asking students do. And this gets back to some of the conversations we've had here through the Robert Wood webinars and through our meeting last fall at the Robert Wood, which is that what are we doing in nursing? What are we asking our students to do? How can we teach them more efficiently and effectively so that we don't ask them to do busy work and thus ask ourselves to do busy work, grading what they're doing as busy work? And I've been able to, once you're teaching a course over and over year after year, sometimes it takes a while, but sometimes it's good to be able to evaluate how much you're asking students to do things and take a step back and say, maybe you don't need to write 4 subnotes. Maybe C is more essential. If I add this component to it, I know that you're learning deeply. And I think that's one thing I didn't hear you talk about. And have you come across that in your literature, and how do you feel about that?
Absolutely. I heard a speaker one time. I was at a national conference, and one of the speakers got up, and they were going through a major curriculum revision, and she said, one of the things that we did is once we had a draft of everything, we assigned one of the faculty to do all the readings and all of the assignments that we were expecting the students to do in each semester. And you can imagine where this is going. She told the crowd it was impossible to do.
Right.
And so when you have this seasoned educator who could not complete what was expected by the students in the allotted time, it was quite illuminating. So you're absolutely right. There's so many things we didn't get to cover today. One of the ones you're alluding to that I love are called classroom assessment techniques, other words called CATS, like the animal. Classroom assessment techniques. And you can do those. I really suggest that those are done formatively and not summatively or summatively. But I use those little 3x5 note cards, and I kind of my students writing a dissertation. I'll say to them, tell me what really enhanced your learning today. Write it on one side of the card, flip it, and tell me what kept you from learning today. And in those, and I time them for 1 minute. I have a little bell, and I bring it to class. I ring it. 1 minute, it's over. And I get so much information in that 1 minute that just blows me away. I think maybe I've really nailed a topic, and I get some students, this was my muddiest moment. I did not get it at all. So raising a lot of really important issues.
2:30, thanks for the comments. We have a couple more questions. Could you flip to the next slide so that I can remind everybody what the assignment is here? And I think I'll take one quick one from Catherine, and then after we have a question from Catherine and Cindy's answer, we will then turn the archive off, the recording, and we'll wrap up for the day. You guys, if I don't have a chance, wish you a happy summer and good luck with the rest of your studies this summer. Here's the assignment, and you heard Cindy talk about stories. This is a great research strategy, but it's also a teaching strategy. So she's posted already, and we have a great example of how to do it. So go for it. So Catherine, quick question, and Cindy, quick answer.
This is really just a quick comment and contribution for validation and insight. With 20 years of clinical teaching experience and as often a course leader of late, I've been asked to act as an ombudsperson for students who are grieving grades of failure, etc. And what I do is I meet privately with them after all is said and done, and sometimes their family members, etc. And what I stress is that in those sessions, I always use kindness, I use compassion, I listen very carefully to the student's position, I'm present, and I offer hope. I offer them hope. I tell them that, this is a learning opportunity, and that there is a chance, for them to continue their career and their studies in the future. But in the interim, I help them to gain insight about what has contributed to this situation or this failure, while at the same time boundaries and helping them to understand, behaviorally and objectively what contributed to their failure or whatever it may be, so that it turns out to be a really an optimistic learning opportunity, so they're not left feeling bitter and feeling, victimized, et cetera, And every single time I've had a very positive outcome with this. So I think it's important that we really do be compassionate, we listen well, and that we do offer hope for the future.
I think that's a great summary for this session. And Cindy, I'll give you a moment to respond if you wish. Otherwise, I want to clap hands and thank you very much, Cindy, for sharing your time and your expertise. This has been great, and thank you, scholars and faculty, for your participation. So, Cindy, you can last word here. And then we're
okay.
Stop.
My last word is always one of gratitude. for all that you're doing and all that you will do. And thank you, Dr. Billings. I appreciate this opportunity, and I hope that it's been useful, and I hope that our paths will cross in the future, all of you. So if you're anywhere and you see me, please come up and introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you. So Nick and Phil, I think we can turn off the recording. And Cindy, you have the last slide there too, I think, about thanking Nick. He is our fabulous person, keeps us on track here and does all the behind-the-scenes work. So we need him front and center for a big round of applause, and Farrell as well. And thank you, Cindy. So
thank you.
Hey, guys.
Okay, and if anybody wants to hang out here for a minute after class, come up and talk to the teachers. You're welcome to do that.